Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm really happy to introduce our next guest, Megrette Fletcher. Megrette is the author of a book, Discover Mindful Eating for Kids, and she's kindly given you all a 50% discount code to order that book. She is a registered dietitian. And in 2005, she co-founded the Center for Mindful Eating, which is an international nonprofit organization exploring the benefits of mindfulness and health. She does many webinar trainings, articles. She's written many books for professionals, and so we're very lucky to have her here. We'll have all her information in the speaker bio if you want to check out her website, and she's also given you all a free handout, the Hunger Fullness Scale for Children, which looks really useful. So welcome, Megrette, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. So with that terrific introduction, how about if we switch over and we'll do the little presentation and jump in if you have any questions.
Sounds great.
All right. So I'd like just to talk a little bit about your child's superpower. And one of the things that we know is when we talk about mindfulness, we can apply it to food and eating. And as you had mentioned in 2005, myself and a whole bunch of really smart people got together to start the Center for Mindful Eating. It is over 10 years old. We have many researchers on the board. And really, the center was charged with finding evidence-based to support the principles of mindful eating. And there are just so many. So let's talk about supporting hunger and fullness. So as you did mention, I am a mom, and though I do have two children, they're not kids anymore. I am a meditator. I've been meditating for a number of years, and I do this for a living as well. So the question that I always like to start off with when we talk about mindful eating, are we mindful or are we mindful? And I think that this little picture, though it does have a dog in it, I think a lot of times this really describes our kids. And so we as adults might have a mind full of other distractions, but our kids actually are naturally mindful. And so if we can go back to that superpower of just being here, being present, we can really help our kids in so many ways. And you and I had a conversation before we started the record button just about how mindfulness has changed our lives. But, because my kids aren't little anymore, I know it's changed their lives because they've reported back to me. That was really helpful, Mom. Thanks for teaching me this.
Great.
It really is. So I'd like just to start off with coping. And this is kind of when I look at all the research around mindfulness and mindful eating, really what we're dealing with is when we have young children, we are trying to set the foundation for how do we cope with challenging emotions? And the reality is there's just a limited number of things that we can use. There's just not that many coping mechanisms out there. And unfortunately, the coping mechanisms that are available, the ones that are typically modeled, are maladaptive coping mechanisms. So when we talk about maladaptive coping mechanisms, if you do any research, we're talking about coping mechanisms that create other problems. They may address the challenging emotion in the short term, but in the long term, they create other problems. And typical ones that we see modeled are coping with food, television, internet, gaming, social media, alcohol, or drugs. And so those are the typical ones. When children are under the age of 6, they have very few of those mechanisms available to them. And so typically what we see is food, TV, internet, and acting out are resources that kids are using to cope with. And I think a lot of times what happens when we're dealing with these adaptive coping mechanisms versus maladaptive is parents are just really confused. Why is my kid expressing this maladaptive coping? around food and eating. And so why are they picky? Why are they refusing to eat? Or why are they not stopping? Why are they sneaking food? Why are they doing these things? So if we can understand that it may be just because the food tastes good, period, that could happen. But a lot of times when we dig a little bit deeper, we recognize that they're trying to cope. And a lot of times they need some support around being with these feelings. So a lot of times what happens is this confusion often begins because the parent isn't aware of their direct experience with food or hunger or fullness. And this unawareness can cause the parent to assume the child is also unaware. So we project our experience onto those that we're near. So if my mind is full with busy chatter, I'm going to assume that my kid's mind is full with busy chatter. And we already know that society is teaching our kids lots, and sometimes it's good things to learn, and sometimes it's a good example of what not to learn. So we have two teachers in the world, so they're both good. We just need someone to point out. So really, when we talk about mindful eating for kids, we're really talking about helping children recognize their direct experience and really helping them use that superpower. So in the research, just so you know that I'm using research terms, so if you choose to go on the internet, you know what to look for, but the research term is embodied, or what is the experience in our body. And there's lots of reasons why we talk about embodied experience with children. So as an educator, Helen, you kind of come from that space of recognizing that children they're not able to understand conceptual learning. So when you talk about, trying to prevent something in the future, or you're directing them to a consequence that, when you're older, do kids, preschoolers get that?
No, they don't, right? They need something concrete, really, to...
They really, yeah. So that concrete learning is really where I think the beauty and the brilliance of mindful eating is coming back to. So that embodied experience is something that children, very, very young, 2 years old, if we start teaching them and we start saying, if you trust your experience, I trust you to tell me, you are actually creating really secure attachments. And for those who are in the audience who are curious about neurobiology, those are very, very strong pathways that really help kids say, what, instead of going to drugs, I'm going to go talk to mom or dad, or instead of going to hurt myself, I'm going to go talk to this adult who's supporting me, who has this, I have this really good attachment to. And so the embodied experience is a way that we can reconnect our kids and keep connecting our kids to their direct experience in a non-judgmental way, very, very quietly. This is like ninja mindfulness. Like, it's so subtle, they won't even know, which is even better.
Exactly.
So let's jump in how to do that. So the embodied experience begins with and supporting our child to acknowledge their present moment experience, and hunger fullness training really can do that. And so this is called a hunger fullness chart, and it was designed for children under the age of 5. And what you'll see is it is a pea pod, and inside are little hunger and fullness peas. And for my preschool kids and for my preschool kids, we use, I have like little stuffed animals that they're made, but they're peas, and they have a zipper, and we put the peas inside the pea pod. And we do that with socks. You can do it with socks. We just get green socks, and then we put these like green balls inside, and they can see like oh, the sock is full. And so we talk about that like that's your stomach. And they go, oh, my stomach is like that pea pod that I use at school. And you go, right. And if you put too much in, it doesn't really fit. It's kind of ouchy, you know? And they get that. They're like, oh, ouchy, pain. Okay. Ouchy is really that thing that kids direct experience. It's concrete. They can get it. And so really what we want to do is we want to use pain or this unpleasant marker for the child to notice. And that's being too, and I put too in bold because it's too much. And that's where the ouchy hunger or the ouchy fullness comes in. And that's something that we want to avoid. And so what we do is we say, well, what is your experience? Is it pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant? And we're not judging the experience. We're not saying if the experience is painful, because that can lead a child and it's not actually getting to their embodied experience. So we just say, is it pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant versus it good or bad? Is it right or wrong? You know, is it, you know, pain or pleasure? We just say pleasant, neutral, unpleasant, those three things. And again, going back to hedonic scales, we can actually use smiley faces to have children connect with their experience around food and eating. So it's just so simple, but yet you're like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that it's so, you know, hands-on and practical for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can create activities and pauses and breaks to have them check in and say, hey, what's your experience eating? What's your experience eating? You know, what's your tummy feel like? And so again, helping the child learn what is neutral and what is pleasant. And ultimately, the goal is for them to recognize neutral experiences, because not everything that we eat is going to be fantastic. Life just doesn't work that way. It's just fine, you know? And it doesn't have to be like, woo, it gets to just be food. And when we have celebrations, we can have just food, but the thing that makes it, wah, so much fun is the people we're with, or the social interaction, or the helping, or, you know, the display, or the connection that we feel. And so we start recognizing that food, again, is one of those ways to support secure attachment.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think sometimes we overlook all those other aspects surrounding food and just concentrate on the actual eating of food, don't we? But it is the whole atmosphere. And I know here in Europe, you know, eating with the family is such an important part of the culture. You know, sitting down to a meal together, but it's the whole experience, not only the food. It's having, you know, the big family there and everybody talking, and it gets very loud, especially in Italy. But yeah, it's a whole experience, I think.
Yeah, it's just great. And when we can make the richness of food and eating fill that, I think that there's it just nourishes us in a different way. And I think that that's, for many people, that's the nutrition that they're missing, is that connection. So that's really powerful. So again, the key is that using a hunger fullness scale is not to lose weight or to limit intake. It is to help our kids become present and be with their direct experience, and to understand their direct experience. It's not actually to change or modify that. And so one of the ways that we do that is we have other tools and techniques like the Hunger Peas, and they say something like, hey, is there any room for us these last couple of bites on our plate? And the stomach is saying, no, we're comfortable. I don't need to keep eating. And again, we're connecting that with, if I keep eating, I'm actually decreasing my enjoyment. I'm not increasing my enjoyment. And if we were maybe a little on the empty side, we might say, hey, is there any room for us? Yeah, I do need to eat a little bit more, because I would actually have the unpleasant experience of being too hungry. And so this is kind of this process. Now, I think every parent out there, I think every parent, every adult who works with children has recognized that they just put enough in their stomach so they're not experiencing pain. And then, 30 minutes later, they want to eat again. And that's great. And I know that we're thinking, I need you to go like 3 hours without food. So you want to just kind of recognize that the change process happens very slowly, and that we can just help people to say, when you only had those 3 bites, and you said you were full, was that, what was your experience a little bit later? And they'll go, I got hungry again. I go, yeah, so eating, here, how we're running our school, or we actually want you to eat enough to get to the next eating break. So what would be your ideas to go do that? Or how could we achieve that? And pretty much the kids are like, oh, I get it. I just don't want to not be in pain. I actually want to nourish my body. I want to get enough in there that I can make it to my next break. And we're like, yeah, oh, that's it. And so they're like, okay. And that will be, months that will work on that concept. So it doesn't happen fast, but then they start recognizing like, oh, this is the right amount of food to put in my stomach. This is an amount that's comfortable. This is an amount that meets within the organizational guidelines, like when breaks are and when I can eat again.
I love that. Sometimes we want everything to happen instantly, but it doesn't, does it? So, taking the time really to just keep bringing that concept in slowly and letting children get used to thinking about things, and then suddenly one day they start saying, don't they? Oh, yes, I'm full. Or I need to eat a little more. And so amazing. I love the peas as well. I think that's a great idea. Really attract kids, won't it, with the the little individual peas. So
yeah, so the preschools and the school environments that utilize these concepts, they introduce them right at the beginning, and they schedule time for that checking in, which I think is really important. The book that I wrote, Discover Mindful Eating for Kids, we talk about, as educators, a lot of times we're really knowledgeable about the change process, but children are with their families, and so families need a frame by which they can understand the change process. And so the book kind of talks about that, but the formula that I use, it's very simple, and I'd like to know if I can share it with everyone. Yeah. So it's discover. So that's the first thing we want to do, is whenever we introduce anything, we need to discover it. And again, we as adults might say, well, of course kids know about hunger fullness, but actually they don't. That's a concept, and that we have to connect it with an experience for a child to understand it. So first we discover, and then we explore, well, what is hunger to you? What is fullness to you? What is satiety to you? So we want to explore those, and we, again, want to connect it with that direct experience. Okay. The next phase is play. I know, everyone's like, what do you mean? I want my kids to change. I need to set up a schedule. Or I'm like, no, don't. Play. Play with hunger. Play with fullness. Play with satiety. Play. Have it be fun. If we can get the fun back into food and eating, your kids are going to be, everyone, we're raising a whole nation of just really just great eaters. And when I say great eaters, they eat a variety of foods. They eat enough to nourish their body. They're not eating so little that they're, struggling with, malnutrition, and that they're actually growing and thriving. And then the last one is creating these fun challenges. And so the Discover, Explore, Play Challenge is the format by which you can introduce the change process to parents. It's a great format by which we can do all of our teaching and training, because again, when we're working with kids, play is essential. So it's just it's just really essential.
Great. So sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's it.
Okay, I was just going to ask you, is there any research kind of showing that teaching preschoolers these concepts then, prevents eating disorders or helps children be healthier as they go into primary and secondary schools?
Yeah, there's new research emerging that under the age of 6 is really where children will create a healthy relationship with food, and that really focusing in on creating a healthy relationship with food is really showing the most promise. So the mindful eating piece prior to the age of 6 is really, that's our sweet spot, where we can really help kids connect to their direct experience, really help and support them with verbalizing what their direct experience is and using that information to advocate for themselves. And again, the research that we have around mindfulness and mindful eating is really talking about establishing adaptive coping mechanisms versus these maladaptive coping mechanisms. And so again, the research that we have coming out of that is that being present is an adaptive coping mechanism, and that again, it's a training process. So kids don't sit and meditate, but what they do is they can tap back into their present moment experience. And as adults, many times it's us that need to let go. The kid's already there, but we're the ones that have our mind full of other things. So
True.
a lot of times just kind of pausing and slowing down and setting places to kind of check in. And my children, when they were very young, we did a lot of play at the table. And so it wasn't this very rigid place. We had drum rolls and we had crunch contests and we played, and we would go to the grocery store and find ugly things to eat, and just really different things to really help connect children to food and eating.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important that when we're doing things with young kids, that it is playful and fun. So thank you so much, Megrette, for sharing all that. And I forget if I mentioned at the beginning, but we have the PDF of the handout here. I'll also put a note on the top so people can download that before the session, but that will be in Megrette's speaker bio, along with the book and the code to get a discount, and the hunger fullness scale handout that she's provided for us. So thank you so much again for coming on the Preschool Summit and sharing all this knowledge and great practical ideas that anybody can really take and do in the classroom right away to help kids learn how to eat mindfully. So thank you.
And practice on yourself. So before you do anything with any kid, practice on yourself and say, hey, what's my experience when I do this? Because it works for adults too.
Yeah, we could all use that knowledge to kind of see where we are, and especially around this time of year when there's lots of holiday food and things coming up. So where we tend to overeat sometimes. So yeah, it will be a good test period for everyone. So thanks again for joining us, and I hope we can keep in touch.